This podcast is part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club, a program designed to help all podcasts reach their full potential. For information about joining the Robots Radio Rocket Club, check out robotsradio.net.
Hey all you heroes and champions, crows, pirates, and inquisitors. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast. I'm Shelby.
And I'm Austin.
And we are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe. From the Maker to Lyrium to Aravels, we will cover it all. There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hey Shelby.
Hey Austin.
You ready to talk about some Dragon Age?
I'm so ready.
All right, well, what we got today?
Today, we have a character deep dive.
Ooh.
I'm really excited about this one. This was my first Dragon Age romance.
A big moment.
I know. It was a good one.
I bet. So, we're doing a character deep dive today. So, who is it? You kept us all in suspense.
Well, I mean, they know by the title of the episode.
That's true.
Well, today we're talking about Leliana.
Yeah. The bard, assassin, chantry sister. You can name it all.
Yes, she is a lot of things.
Yes.
And we'll get into all of them.
All right. Well, let's go on. Since this will be a shorter episode, let's just get into it. Lay on those fun facts for me.
All right. Well, my first fun fact is more of just like a general synopsis of her life. So Leliana is an Orlesian bard who considers herself to be a Ferelden. She became a lay sister in the Chantry and did all of this before joining the Warden's party in Dragon Age Origins. In Dragon Age Inquisition, she is the Spymaster and serves as an advisor to the Inquisitor. And in Dragon Age 2, I know I did this out of order, but in Dragon Age 2, we briefly meet her as the left hand of the Divine.
Mm-hmm. Sister Nightingale.
Yeah, so she does have several nicknames. Most prominently, I think most of us would know her as Sister Nightingale, or just even Nightingale itself. Others include Red, who she is called by the Iron Bull, and apparently Sarah calls her Shadows of Birds. I've never heard that, but apparently it happens.
What is Varric's nickname for her?
I think it's Nightingale.
I think you might be right.
So, in Dragon Age Origins, she is a romance option for either male or female hero of Ferelden. And I think Origins is really the game where we learn the most about her. We do learn a lot about her in Inquisition, but she's just more vulnerable and open in Origins. So you get a lot more, I think, authenticity and honesty from her when you talk to her in Origins. So that means we know more about her from that game.
Right.
So some of the things we learn about her in the course of mostly Dragon Age Origins are, or I guess it's just one thing, that Leliana collects nugs as pets. And the Warden can indeed give her one, I think, that you capture when you're in the Deep Roads in Orzammar. And she will name this nug Schmooples.
Aww.
Which is very, very cute. So in addition, Leliana is one of just a few characters who appear in all 3 games. Others include Cullen and Flemeth in the base game. And if you include DLC, Ban Tegan appears in all 3. Isabella appears in all 3 if you include the multiplayer. And Alistair, if you make the right choices. So in just the base game, no matter what you do, Leliana, Cullen, and Flemeth are the only 3 characters that appear in all games. But Leliana also appears in Asunder, The Masked Empire, and Mage Killer.
Oh, Mage Killer would be a comic, correct?
they're all, yeah, yeah. Mage Killer is a comic.
You about said they were all
comics. They're not. That's false. That is false. Yeah. So she has a lot of appearances. I think she rivals Varric for number of appearances because he appears a lot too.
Yes.
So if you talk to Bethany Hawk in the Chantry in 2, she will say this: "I miss the Lothering Chantry. Sister Leliana always told the best stories." And in Dragon Age Inquisition, Leliana comments on how Bethany always enjoyed her stories, which I think is very sweet. And then in addition, one more companion. If you talk to Aveline in the Chantry in Dragon Age 2, she will comment about feeling uncomfortable around Chantry sisters due to a red-haired trickster in Lothering.
That's funny.
Yeah, I knew you would enjoy that. Yeah, so like previously mentioned, Leliana served as the left hand of the Divine after the events of Origins. And a paper found in the Redcliffe Castle reports that Leliana has the highest resistance to the Blight out of all of those who have been experimented upon. The cause of this, however, was not determined by the Elder One's minions, and the issue is never revisited. And I should also add that you get this when you side with the mages and go into the future and meet future Leliana. That is terrifying.
Yes. It's interesting that she's resistant to the Blight.
I know. I think it's very fascinating. I also think, if the hero of Ferelden survives into Dragon Age Inquisition, they are searching for a cure to the Blight. So this seems like something that is connected to that.
Right. It also could be something about, like, hinting at things like BioWare has hinted that Leliana does indeed have, like, a special connection to the Maker. And so it could be something with that as well.
That's true, too.
I think yours is more likely.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think they have done less of hinting and more of outright saying that she has a connection to the Maker. But yes, I agree with you.
All right. Well, you ready to learn about Leliana? Or tell me about Leliana?
I am very excited. I feel like Leliana has... I felt like before I did the research for her, I kind of overlooked her as a companion. And I feel like I have a lot more respect for her. I feel like I also say that every week or every time we do a character deep dive. But I really mean it this time. So, Leliana was born in Orlais. But her mother was Ferelden, so she considers herself to be Ferelden as well. Even though she has a very strong Orlesian accent, she considers herself to be Ferelden, and that's really important. I think we should honor that. Liliana's mother was named Wasine. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I'm trying my best here. And her mother was a servant of Lady Cicely Vasseur, who was an Orlesian noble. When Liliana's mother dies, Lady Cicely became Liliana's guardian. So she dies when Liliana is pretty young. So Lady Cicely really is with her for most of her formative years. And this is when she first learns about Orlesian nobility culture, the grand game, how to interact with the royal court, and all of these kinds of things. She really didn't know anything about this before. During this time, she also became obsessed with books, which is relatable. She especially loved Orlesian and Ferelden stories, ballads and songs, and any stories she could learn from Lady Cicely's elven servants.
Which I believe she will tell you if you ask her in Origins. She'll tell you some of...
Yeah, I think she'll tell you multiple stories. I can't remember because it's been a long time since I've done that, but I think she will tell you multiple stories. Right.
Well, I know that she'll tell you about Sir Aveline, who we've talked about in a previous episode. She'll tell you about Andraste. She'll give you the Andraste story. And there's a bunch of others. But I think there is a couple of elven stories in there, and I think that she tells like the story of Finharel's betrayal, maybe, but I don't know that for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Well, when Leliana was 16, she made her very first trip to Val Royeaux. And she went to Val Royeaux so that she could attend a soiree, a party, a festive event with Lady Cicely. This is when she meets Marjolaine, who at the time was a wealthy widow and a patron of the arts. Marjolaine was impressed with Leliana, and Leliana was infatuated with Marjolaine. After the party, Marjolaine began calling upon the older Lady Cicely. And Lady Cicely, because she was getting older, often left Leliana to entertain Marjolaine. And this is really when their relationship begins. And I think we would be missing something important if we didn't lift up that this relationship is extremely messed up. Like, Leliana is a teenager. She's 16, 17 at this time. Marjolaine is not only an adult, she's old enough to have become a widow. So there's a significant age difference here. And they do enter into a romantic relationship, as we know from the games. Romantic and professional relationship. So there's multiple levels to the weirdness. But I really think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about how predatory Marjolaine is to Leliana. It's not just a cute romantic story. It's deeply, deeply predatory. And I think if Marjolaine was a man, we might be able to see that a little bit more clearly.
I totally agree with that.
But the story with Marjolaine does go a little bit deeper, so we'll continue. Leliana, as a teenager would do, becomes fascinated by Marjolaine. She is enthralled by her, which, you know what? I was a teenager who had a crush on an older person. Like, it's natural, I think, for teenagers to become infatuated with people who are older and wiser and have more money and power than they do. But at the same time, it's the responsibility of the older person to, like, not pursue that infatuated teenager because, you know, why would you want to be with a teenager anyway, as an adult? But anyway, Marjolaine, as we know, does not stay away from Leliana. Marjolaine really does groom Leliana in more ways than one, in a romantic and sexual way, but also in a professional way. She begins to prepare her for the life of being a bard. And not only prepare her for the life of being a bard, but prepare her to be a bard in service to Marjolaine. So, on a hunting trip, Marjolaine gives Leliana her very first bow. In teaching her how to use it during that same trip, Leliana wounded but did not kill a hart that the hunters were tracking. Leliana was too upset to end the animal's suffering, so Marjolaine did it instead. She killed the animal efficiently. Leliana watched in amazement. This is one major example of Leliana becoming more infatuated with Marjolaine. So, this very same summer that they go hunting, Leliana visits Marjolaine in Val Royeaux at her estate. And Marjolaine begins to officially teach her the way of the bard: manipulation, subterfuge, and combat. Her teaching was always subtle and disguised, easily assumed to be merely a lady's idle amusements. But Marjolaine was preparing her. While Leliana was in Marjolaine's company, Leliana meets Tug and Sketch, who become two companions of hers. And we meet them. You can meet them in Origins if you get the DLC Leliana's Song, which I really recommend. It's fun, and if you're a city elf, you can also meet your mom in that.
Aww.
Yes, you don't play as your character from Origins. You play as Leliana, but you do get the opportunity to meet the mother of the city elf. So anyway, Leliana and Tug and Sketch, they all meet and they travel across Thedas together. And Leliana had a lot of freedom during this time. She became much more independent and she became a really skilled bard during this time. But at the same time that she became more free and more independent and more skilled as a bard, Marjolaine grew more fearful of her skill and more jealous of Leliana. So, part of the story in Leliana's song is that Marjolaine has the trio, Tug, Sketch, and Leliana, framed for a crime, arrested, and they get tortured, basically. Thankfully, Leliana escapes, and she's helped by revered mother Dorothea, who eventually becomes Divine Justinia V. Leliana does escape, and so does Sketch. Tug, unfortunately, does die. But eventually, through all of this backstabbing by Marjolaine and everything, Leliana eventually escapes, and she wants a new life. She wants out of the business of the bard. And so she finds purpose in the chantry. And she finds purpose with revered mother Dorothea. And Dorothea really gives her advice and helps her kind of get her life back on track. And she does. She stays with the chantry until we meet her in Dragon Age Origins, and she becomes part of the Hero of Ferelden's party. In memory of Tug, who did die, like I said, Leliana toasts his memory every year with Antivan plum brandy, pouring some out as well, and she always says Atrast Tuncha Sauraka, which is a dwarven phrase, as he was a dwarf. Her relationship with Sketch, on the other hand, remains rocky due to Tug's death, number one, and number two, Leliana has a tendency to embellish the past, even though she has had conversations with Sketch in recent times. So ultimately, Leliana ends up in the village of Lothering. She wants to atone for her sins and hide from Marjolaine. She then becomes a lay sister, as we know, and becomes intensely religious. And this is when she sees a vision that she interprets as being from the Maker. Her vision is a vision of her discovering an impossible white rose on a dead bush in Lothering. This vision both made her an outcast, and it spurred on her passion to help the Warden during the Fifth Blight. No one could shake her determination to stop the evil of the Blight and bring hope to the world. And like I said, she joins the Fifth Blight, or she joins the Warden to fight the Fifth Blight shortly after seeing her vision. And I should also mention that one of the reasons why her vision makes her an outcast is because there are a few quotes, I think, in the Chant of Light that talk about no one has direct communication from the Maker except for Andraste. And so for Leliana to claim that her vision came from the Maker is basically to put herself on the same level as Andraste, which that is understandably hugely controversial in their religion. So
Right.
So that's most of her life.
Right. I think that it's interesting. So Leliana is named left hand of Divine Justinia. But Cassandra is named right hand by the Divine before Justinia.
Sure.
I believe that the Divine in Dawn of the Seeker is not Divine Justinia.
No, it's not. It's Divine Beatrice, I believe.
Yes. And Beatrice names her the right hand, and so I guess Justinia was just like, yeah, Cassandra, you do good work. There's no need to change you from your position.
Or maybe she didn't have anyone to appoint in that role.
Right. And so I just think it's interesting that both these kind of foils of each other, in that Cassandra grows up like in the Chantry, basically, with her family and becoming a seeker and all of that. And then through her story, has to challenge that and change that in her worldview of that. And like Leliana comes into the Chantry from the outside, and is changed and nurtured in that way. And then now you have both of these kind of perspectives of two characters who've kind of arrived to the same point through different like paths.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. And they are kind of opposites to each other because Cassandra grows up wealthy. She grows up privileged. A lot of pain in her life, but she still does grow up with a lot of wealth and, financial privileges around her. Whereas Leliana grows up not quite an orphan. Well, yes, an orphan, but not quite destitute. But she grows up as a servant of someone. She doesn't grow up with an immense amount of privilege. She does have some privileges, but she doesn't have, wealth and status in society. She has to earn that for herself. Whereas Cassandra does not. And it's interesting because they almost have opposite routes. Like Cassandra is very much a person who is like thrust into the middle of all this stuff. And she's like, okay, fine, I'll do what I have to. I'll save these people. And Leliana like wants to be there, and she tries to figure out and find ways that she can be in the middle of the action, at least as a younger person.
Right.
So I definitely think it's interesting how they are opposites in those ways.
Right. And I think that Leliana is a very like example of like how you can have this like strict moral code, because she has a real strong definition of what she thinks is right and what should be done. But in a way, like she differs a little bit from Cassandra, because Leliana is very much I will do whatever is necessary to achieve what is right.
Yeah, and Leliana is definitely much more ruthless than Cassandra. And I think that especially comes in Inquisition. I don't see her as ruthless at all in Origins. I mean, even when you do her side quests, like with Marjolaine, I'm pretty sure she doesn't want you to kill Marjolaine. Like, you can let her go. And I think that's like the ideal. I can't totally remember since it's been so long since I've done it, but the Leliana of Inquisition, like in her side quest in that game, it's basically the same thing with a different person, and you have to like restrain her and talk her down just so she won't kill the young woman. And like, she's in a chantry, like she's gonna commit murder, cold-blooded murder in the middle of the place of worship.
Right. And that's Leliana. And I think that in a lot of ways it comes down to Leliana doesn't tolerate betrayal. After everything that she's been through, she doesn't want to let betrayal go unpunished.
I think that's true, but I also think that over the course of her life in the games, she has felt like she has to be ruthless and she doesn't have any other options. And so that's why one of the reasons why I always soften her, quote unquote, in Inquisition, because I just can't stand for her to continue to be that ruthless and cruel, even to some of her scouts and the members of the Inquisition. I think it's better to soften her, even if it does make the Inquisition a smidge weaker.
All right. So you want to go on to some quotes?
Yeah, and significant contributions.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted just to mention what she does during the events of Dragon Age 2, because she's not a companion. She is in the game briefly, but she's not a companion. So what she does in between the games may be a bit more hidden if you haven't dug into like the codex and extra materials. So after the Blight, she serves as the left hand of the Divine for Divine Justinia V. She was basically a spymaster. She had her own agents. She reinvented herself, and she became like the bard that she was as a young woman. And so as the left hand, she did a lot of things, but most primarily she investigated the Mage Rebellion in Kirkwall. She investigated Elven rebellions, And she investigated suspicions of Kunari activity at Chateau Haine. So those are some major things that she does, at least 2 of which we encounter directly during Dragon Age 2. And she does more as well. Those are just some of the big things. So if you read The Masked Empire, she shows up at the end of that, I think, as kind of like, hey, you're on the brink of war. What the heck is happening to Celine? And so she's kind of just like keeping her ear to the ground in all situations, in case the Divine needs to know about something. That's basically her job.
Right.
And I think she's very good at her job.
She's very good at her job. Because I think there's a conversation you can have with Varric where he's talking about like all his contacts or whatever, and the Inquisitor can basically be like, oh, should you be the Spymaster? And he goes, I'm nowhere near the skill of Leliana.
Right.
And like there are several companions that you can ask opinions about your advisors for. And all of them are basically like, there's no one better to be in the position of Spymaster than Leliana.
Yes. But I will be honest, I kind of hate that it's her. Because, her whole thing in Origins was that she didn't want to do that anymore.
Right.
And, like, we can talk about, doing your duty for the Divine, but at some level, I don't know.
Right. No, I hear you. Definitely hear you in that. But, I mean, almost every single thing that she suggests in every situation in the war table is, let's just kill them all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the steps to softening her is there's a spy that betrays you, and it's like at the very beginning. I think we're still in Haven. And you basically overhear it, and you can be like, we don't just kill our people. What is wrong with you? And then you have this whole back and forth. Where she's like, fine, we'll do it your way. And I just, like, that shows you right there how ruthless she's become. Well, let's get into some significant quotes. So this one ties perfectly into what we're talking about, because this is a quote, I think from Origins, and this is about when she went to the Chantry after she was a bard. And she said this: in the cloister, away from the fuss and the flurry of the cities, I found peace. And in that stillness, I could hear the Maker.
Yeah, that sounds very Origins, Leliana.
Yeah, she's very spiritual in that game. Not that she isn't later, but... another quote that I have is from Dragon Age Inquisition. And this is where she is more of like... I think this comes when you're talking to her about becoming divine, I think. I'm not totally for sure, but this is what she says. The Chantry dictated where it should have inspired. It spoke of judgment instead of acceptance. It should encourage the good in everyone rather than rebuke us for our sins. No one should be turned away from our doors. No one is without worth. Whoever you are, whatever your mistakes, you are loved unconditionally. In your heart shall burn an unquenchable flame.
It really shows kind of like where Leliana is in Dragon Age Inquisition, because like in Origin, she's very much like kind of like rose-colored glasses with the Chantry. Like the Chantry is good, it's always good. Whereas Inquisition, both she and Cassandra are both like, nah, we got some problems and we need to talk about these problems.
And I think they both do a good job at reformation. If they become Divine Victoria. But the thing is, because of their life experiences, they have vastly different perspectives on what the Reformation should be. Because Cassandra comes from the Seekers. She has a lot of experience with the Templars. So she sees that perspective of it. Not that she doesn't, have empathy for the mages, but also like there's a lot of issues there. And I think she's primarily focused on we need to get the Rite of Tranquility reversal into the hands of people who can use it. So I think that's her primary focus, whereas Leliana is more concerned with, I think, justice for elves, which makes sense for her because she grew up as a servant when most of the servants around her were elves. Not most likely, but in all of my playthroughs, she romanced an elf, so one of her best friends is an elf. So I just think that she's got a lot more experience with elven issues than perhaps Cassandra does. So
Right.
And then I brought one more quote for us before we move on to what she does after DAI.
Okay.
And I think that this quote really sums her up in Inquisition. And again, this is from the scenes where if you side with the mages and you go into the future. The interrogator says, "You will break." And Leliana says, "I will die first, or you will."
No.
No mercy.
Yes. No mercy. Surrender is not an option.
Right. The last thing I have before we talk about our opinions is about what happens after Inquisition. So Leliana, like Cassandra or Vivian, can become the next divine. They all three are known as Divine Victoria. So if she is made divine, Leliana institutes a lot of reforms. She opens the chantry to male clerics and allows chantry leaders to marry, particularly if she has been romanced in Origins. She allows this. Her message of love being the Maker's greatest gift spreads even though there is opposition from within the chantry. So that's a real big theological change. She also decreed that the Canticle of Shartan returns to the canonical chant. We have talked previously about how the Canticle of Shartan, which tells of his story in fighting alongside Andraste, is known as dissonant, which basically just means heretical and is like not in the official copies. So Leliana puts it back in there, makes it known as like officially part of the Chant of Light. And this deeply, deeply divides the chantry. And generally all Andrastians. If Leliana is softened, Mother Giselle will basically say that she believes Leliana has won many allies to her cause through her intelligence and her faith. If she is hardened, on the other hand, Mother Giselle will say that Leliana is a divine that few would dare disagree with. And if you don't finish Liliana's personal quest, Mother Giselle will note that she believes that Liliana's voice is not as strong as she wished it was. Mm-hmm. So all in all, I think she's a frightening and powerful divine, but I think she makes some really good changes.
Yes, I would agree. She definitely is like the trial by fire with the chantry. Like, just do it, and whatever happens, happens, and we will deal with that. Whereas Cassandra and Vivian are probably a little more tactical in their roles as divines. But Leliana definitely is, there are changes going to happen, and those changes are happening, and you can get on board or get out of the way.
Get out. Yeah, I mean, I don't think Vivian institutes that many changes, to be honest, other than like restoring the circles. But I do agree with you that Cassandra probably takes the more moderate path, but I think she also takes the path that is going to give you the most sustainable change, whereas Leliana is just like, burn it all down, we're going to start over. Right. And honestly, both have their uses. I've been both of those people, so I can't criticize them either way. Mm-hmm.
All right. So as we all know, there's a little bit of a plot hole in Dragon Age.
Which time?
Well, at least in regards to Leliana. And that's as if you've played Dragon Age Origins, you know, if you take Leliana to the Temple of Sacred Ashes and you decide to poison them, Leliana will stand against you in that, and you will have to kill her. There are ways to do it without having to kill Leliana, but it involves leaving her at the camp and having a pretty high persuasion kind of check on her on the way back. So she could die, yet even if you make that decision, Leliana shows up both in Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition. So what's the deal?
Okay, so at the end of Inquisition, Leliana, well, not at the end of Inquisition, at the end of Trespasser and then into the future, Leliana basically withdraws from everyone and everything. She withdraws from the Inquisition. If it continues, she withdraws from her friends. And
if she was killed in Origins.
Yeah, she becomes very distant and contemplative, and she very often secludes herself in the rookery with no one but her birds, her ravens, for company. One morning, the residents of Skyhold awake to a great, like, bleeding of the wings of the ravens and a huge cloud of them in the sky above the fortress leaving. Those who investigate this find both the rookery and Leliana's chambers vacant, with one single message as an explanation. And this is what that message was. The lyrium sang thought into being. Now time is stale, and the melody is called elsewhere. Until I am needed, I am free. So basically, she was a lyrium ghost the whole time if you killed her in Origins.
Seems like a cop-out.
It's very convenient writing.
Yes. It very much to me seems like an after the fact thing that they tacked on. Mm-hmm. Where they said, well, we need to do something. It does open some interesting lore possibilities, and that, well, there's already the implication that lyrium is alive through what Bianca tells us. And that red lyrium contains the blight, and the blight can only inhabit something that is alive.
True.
So there's already evidence that lyrium may, in fact, be alive. But this suggests that lyrium then has agency as well.
That's true. That's a really good point. If we think about the Descent DLC and like the Titan and all of that kind of stuff, I don't think that's too far of a stretch.
And like there's a lot of mystery around lyrium, and we'll definitely get into a lyrium episode later on in the podcast. But lyrium is also called, I believe, Tears of the Fade is another
I think
name.
That is accurate, yes.
Which connects, lyrium has this weird connection to magic, and it's highly addictive to people who consume it. And so it's just very interesting. There's a lot going on with it, and the idea that it has an agency now to it just adds a whole nother layer of like, what is this?
Yeah.
And then like, if it is like something that's related to the Fade, and like you think about tears are something that like, you know, kind of escape through small holes in your body, like your tear ducts. Mm-hmm. And so like, is lyrium something that is slipping through holes in the veil from the Fade?
Oh, that's interesting.
And so if that's the case, what's lyrium's connection to Fen'Harel, who claims that he created the veil? And all kinds of things like that.
Well, to be honest with you, these are all questions that I don't think we have the answers to.
Right. I just think it raises a lot of lore issues for what I think is just a way to explain how Leliana is there if you killed her.
Yes, and that's exactly what I was going to say. I think it's a writing maneuver. I don't think it is intended to be any kind of like great lore revelation. I think it's just a useful writing mechanism for them to bring back Leliana without people being mad about retconning.
Right. So I guess I'll go first on our last question, which is why do you love/hate this character?
Yeah.
I tend to like Leliana for the most part. Just I think she's a little funny in Origins. I think she's also naive, and sometimes that annoys me. But I really like her in Inquisition. I think that her character shows someone who moves from like being naive to being more of a realistic person in the world. I think that she's definitely a better leader when she's softened, which is kind of like the opposite of Alistair. Like Alistair is a better leader if he's hardened, whereas Leliana is a better leader if she is softened.
I totally agree with that.
I don't love her as a romanceable option.
In Origin.
And we didn't talk much about her romance, but if you really want to like get more in details to a romance, you can go listen to our fellow Rocket Club podcast, Two Girls, One Ship. They did an episode on her, and it's awesome.
Yes, totally seconding that.
Yes. And so just her romance isn't my favorite. I mean, it's sweet, and it's full of cheesy love and all kinds of things. And so if like cheesy romance is your kind of thing, it's for you. But, you know, I'm a Fenris romancer, so, you know, I like pain.
Okay, so we know you're emo.
Right, exactly. Cassandra would love the Warden and Leliana romance.
Yeah. that's probably true. If it was
So
a book.
that's how I feel about that. But overall, I mean, she's like an 8 out of 10 character for me in Dragon Age.
Yeah, I think she's a really iconic character, and so because of that, it's hard for me to like separate if I really personally like her. And honestly, I think that if I met Leliana in real life, I would hate her. Especially Origins Leliana. I think I would just be so frustrated by her naivete, especially like she's an adult. Why is she, not only is she an adult, she used to be a bard. Why is she this innocent and naive in Origins? You know, like she knows that the world can be hard and rough and tough and violent and cynical. Like I'm cynical, so I feel like she's seen so much more violence and hard stuff than I have in my life. So why isn't she cynical? And then we do get that side of her in Inquisition, but I just think she really does frustrate me a lot in Origins. But at the same time, you also really need her in Origins because she's the only one that's really that kind of like peppy, optimistic companion. Alistair can be peppy, but I wouldn't call him optimistic. I think he's a little pessimistic. And Wynn can definitely be optimistic, but I wouldn't call her peppy.
Right. And then Morgan is Morgan.
Morgan is none of those things. Zebrin is none of those things. Sten is none of those things. Ogren can be a little peppy, but only if he's been drinking, you know, like.
Right.
She's the goody two-shoes character in Origins, and she's the only one.
And Leliana is definitely that. She's also the only one that is like devoutly Andrastian
in Origins.
Well,
I think Wynn is too.
Right. But like she is the one who like is like super all in. Like Alistair's like, yeah, I believe in Andraste and all this stuff, but he's not going to talk to you about his faith. And Wynn will mention it occasionally, but not the way Leliana does.
That's true.
And you get a lot more of people of the like believers in Andrastianism in Dragon Age Inquisition, because you have Leliana, you have Cullen, you have Cassandra, you have lots of people. And Dragon Age 2, you only really get Sebastian.
Yeah. I think as the games progress, they do a much better job at like portraying realistic religious people. Most, I'm not going to say all, but most religious people are not like Sebastian. Sebastian has no depth. And of course there are these like toxic positive individuals who, you know, live sheltered lives, who don't experience hardship, who do have that kind of shallow faith. But I don't think that's most people. So I think it makes sense that Leliana would grow in through the 3 games, because she goes through a lot of hard stuff. She has to do a lot of really hard things in the time that she is the left hand. So I think it makes sense that she would be this hardened person. And I definitely don't fault her for that. It just makes me sad, honestly. Inquisition Leliana just makes me sad.
Yeah.
I was so happy to see her back the first time I played through Inquisition. And then honestly, by the end, I was heartbroken because when I did her personal quest, I hadn't followed the right steps to soften her. And so I tried to do the right thing, like make her not kill the girl. And she wouldn't listen to me, and she did it anyway.
Right.
So I was sad.
Right. And I think that Leliana is very much a case study of like someone who has had a lot of things taken from her. And I think that like part of her naivete comes from the fact that she was groomed by Marjolaine. And I think that, yes, she does know the world, but she knows the world through Marjolaine's eyes.
That's true.
And so her naivety comes from the fact that she is now experiencing the world through her eyes, and what she experiences altogether.
That's really true. That's a really good point.
And that's also one of the reasons why I don't like the romance for her a lot, is because I feel like Leliana needs a lot more healing before she can jump into a relationship with the hero of Ferelden. Because she has a lot to figure out who she is and who she wants to be. And it's almost impossible to soften her if she romances the hero of Ferelden and the hero of Ferelden sacrifices themselves. Yeah, because I think that was in your play. She basically says to the Inquisitor, well, love is a joke. It's fake. It's not real.
Yeah. And that makes me sad.
Yes, it does make you sad. But I think she's a well-written character. She's a really deep character. But she's also a character that, like, to get that, you have to interact with her. If you don't interact with her and go and talk to her, she's just going to kind of see, like, okay, I'm the Spymaster who is the edgy rogue who wants to kill everything.
That's a really good point. And true.
Yeah. Whereas Cassandra is much more, like, you get more if you interact with her, but if you don't, it's pretty much, you still kind of get her gist.
Yeah, because you're forced to interact with her more, I think. And also it's easier to interact with Cassandra because of their locations.
That is so true. I hate climbing up to the rookery.
I do too. But then you can jump down onto Solas's table.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
Splat!
I like to imagine that Sarah and the Inquisitor do that just to mess with him. But
that's a really good headcanon that I'm now obsessed with.
All right, I'm going to put that into mundane moments on the Two Girls, One Ship podcast. Well, you go ahead.
I was just going to ask if there was anything else we had about Leliana.
I think that's all I really have for her.
I think so, too. She's a good one.
She is. I really enjoy her. All right, well, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the Dragon Age Lorecast. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. As always, you can find us on Twitter at DA Lorecast. If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, email them to us at dalorecast@gmail.com. The Dragon Age Lorecast is a part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club. You can join the Robots Radio Network Discord by clicking the link in our episode description. If you enjoyed our show, we'd love it if you'd subscribe and give us a review. See you next time.
Hi, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Ariel.
And we're the hosts of the Legend of Zelda Lorecast, a podcast about all things Legend of Zelda, from Errol to Zora,
and all the fun things in between.
If you're ready to dive deep and learn more about the Legend of Zelda lore and everything surrounding it, come join us on Legend of Zelda Lorecast. You can find us on Apple iTunes, Spotify, Google, or wherever else you get your podcasts.
We hope to see you soon.